I'd say it's kind of known, but I came from a background of finance, worked as an investment banker for a number of years, nearly half a decade in New York, and now I'm disrupting things through decentralized technologies.
I like that word, disrupt.
Nice. Good morning. Caleb Montour here with Web3 NYC Gallery. The founders of the company, and I'm head of business development, so the goal of our store was to onboard people from in real life. And people walking past a storefront, we wanted to be the new Best Buy or Apple Genius bar that just draws people in curiously and then kind of handhold their way through Web3 products. It's been a great success before. We're expanding fast and looking for, wallets, games, creators, collections to be in real life, like an actual place you can go and see, touch, and feel, kind of making it comfortable and a different way to onboard. Something surprising about me, I've jumped out of a plane almost 70 times, so still here.
All right. Did you say 70 times?
70.
Like 7-0.
7-0.
That's a lot of plane jumping. All right, go ahead. Next.
And I'm Nathan. I'm a protocol engineer / applied cryptographer. I currently work with Gnosis, but I have a long history in this space working with Filecoin, IPFS, Zcash, kind of the list goes on, Ethereum Foundation. And at Gnosis, we are building DAOs. I'm working with the Gnosis Guild, and we build a standard of tooling, and we are helping people create their own organizations within the creator spaces. And additionally, I created a DAO for creators themselves out of the tooling and the theory that we build at Gnosis. And that's called Secor Factory, and it's a place to curate culture together and to foster artists in this Web3 space. I'm excited to be here. Something interesting about me is that I saw Bitcoin in 2009 and I ignored it for 2 years.
Oh, well, a lot of people ignored it for 10 years, so at least you didn't ignore it forever. Now, I want to talk about what we're here for. What do we think right now? I know a lot of us in this space probably have dealt with quote unquote traditional artists. I really don't like that terminology because I think art is art. But in terms of a sense of physical artists and other artists that have done fine art and things like that, I know that it's been a barrier to get some of them to get into this space. I'd like to hear from our panel, what do they see as the biggest barrier right now, and how do you overcome that barrier / obstacle? We can go solo and go down.
I would say that education is probably a big one. I think the use of technology in general throughout mankind and history has always created a lot of benefits, and it creates a lot of ease, whereas blockchain right now has a lot of friction. So when you think about our ecosystem and the idea of having to explain what the idea of MetaMask is, what decentralized identity is, what decentralization as a whole or ethos is, it's a huge hurdle that we're trying to clear right now. And I think the benefits of those things don't necessarily need to be reflected in like how people think about the technology. Like at the end of the day, the best technologies are ones that you don't have to think that much to use. Like if you had to drive a car and it required you to be an engineer to do so, we'd be walking everywhere.
No, we just use the horse, right? I mean, like we still be using horses right now, right?
Exactly.
And it's a really good point. And I think if I could answer my own question, the biggest barrier I do believe is accessibility, right? You talk about education, but the point is this: like if the user experience is not easy, we have been spoiled in terms of how easy the user experience is. And so we're telling people these are all the great benefits. You get to own everything. You get to do this. And they get on, they got to go, they got to figure out MetaMask, figure out their seed phrase, go fund their wallet, then take the time to fund their wallet to send it to that. By the time the 2 or 3 step gets there, right, you lose a lot of people, right? It's the reason why we literally built on Flow. Every place has its advantages and disadvantages, but I believe that we have to make it easy first because we can talk about all the benefits, but if we lose people before we ever get to the benefits, it never matters to them. But I love to hear others' perspective.
Yeah, that takes a lot of the good points, the friction. In a year or two, the biggest onboarders are going to be the ones onboarding retail that doesn't know they're downloading an NFT or doesn't know they're opening a new wallet. Like it's just going to be part of normal life. I'm personally excited to see like how Starbucks is rolling out their digital assets, they're calling it. Also the rewording of the name.
I think that's key. Talk more about like Like, what the fuck is NFT? People like, what-
Yeah. What
I'm
talking
going
like,
through something bad here. Like,
you even like I have multiple artists in my family, so you talked about how to get those artist collectors, explaining to them that they can show their art like around the world with a click of a button. Like, it sounds cool, but then when you try to walk them through it, you realize like, oh, I've been doing this for 4 or 5 years, so it's like natural, but to onboard someone through it is not easy. So tweaking that, making it easier. One point I wanted to go into was the narrative of like NFT, like you said. Like, it doesn't have the greatest connotation right now. It's getting better, but there's not been
you
like
think it's getting better?
Yeah, well, I believe it's
You're
getting
an optimist.
better.
I love optimists. Go ahead.
Yeah, but there hasn't been like a big come to market narrative of like a digital asset, a digital collectible that was like everyone could get behind, like humanitarian, helping the world out. Like, it's all kind of been small groups, exclusive groups.
Or how I can make as much money as possible and flip it. The narrative has been all about speculation.
Exactly. Which is the benefit of a bear market, I guess you could say, is all that is getting flushed out. Like, honestly, it is. And the programs with utility, that's going to be easy access utility, is going to rise to the top in the next year or two. That's kind of exciting to see.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that we do like have a cultural problem right now where we forgot what decentralization means and why it's important, and we sort of looked up to a lot of leaders in the space, not just in Web3 but in art, and so we created a culture of followers when we need a culture of people that will kind of walk together side by side as opposed to just blindly follow down the line. And part of that is because it's a bit hard to cut through. And so I think as far as creators go specifically, there's one of the biggest hurdles for them is this curation issue where it's hard to get discovered. The internet gave us a lot of everything where it's easier, it's like more accessible, it's anybody can boot up a laptop and get their work out into the world. And because of that, there's a bit of noise, and to filter through that is I think a very powerful position. And some of that power sits in the hands of people that don't have the best interests of artists in mind, or they are doing things for a certain way, or they're only choosing artists that look a certain way, sound a certain way, or can be branded in a certain way. And this has generally built a culture that could be better. And so I think that finding decentralized curation mechanisms is really important as well.
Yeah, so that's Nathan, you bring up a lot of points that I love to really dive into, because I think it really focuses on what we're talking about here in terms of creating this ecosystem for creators. There has to be trust into it. And right now, if we're all honest with ourselves, whether FTX and all this stuff is not directly related to everything we're talking about, but for the average consumer, it is. They only see when they say anything that's Web3, they think FTX, and a lot of that has to do with how the media does stuff. We know they're about clickbait, and if the media here, you're offended, you're about to get offended, I'm sorry, but here's the thing, right? Media's job is just to get clickbait. I believe media and how it in its current form, it's toxic to the mind like sugar is to the body. The goal is for you to consume it, just to see it, but not really go into depth. But we know we have this issue. So is the issue, and this is not something that I want to just leave it up to the group. So one, let's break this up. How do we build public trust back into the space? I have a perspective on this. I think we focus on things that actually that are about utilities, social impact, and showing the power of this technology and how it can transform, how it can connect people across the world in a much easier way than our traditional way with banking. And we show how we can connect creators and cultures everywhere, and we give real life examples. But I want to hear from the others. How do we build public trust? That's my first question. My next question is going to be a really good debate, but that's my first one.
I would say that it's super important from a regulatory perspective for there to be an endorsement from these centralized big organizations across the world.
You already dived to my next point.
No, it's true though.
It's because we got Sagittarius. It's the same day we think
it's true though, because when you think about it, like regardless of how you think about it, decentralization as a concept and all of these things is great on paper, but we, especially in the Western world, are built on the idea of endorsement, right? Like if you think about it entirely, like the banking system here is functions on the need for there to be trust. If you go to Bank of America downtown and you want to send money from myself to somebody else, you have to trust that XYZ person behind the counter is a good actor. And that usually is the case here because we don't have that much fraud here in the banking system, right? There's obviously fraud everywhere, but relatively, but like relatively to the emerging markets where these countries are embracing Web3 technologies, if you go to West Africa, if you go to Latin America, these people don't have that luxury the same way that people do have here, right? And so when you think about that, I think if we have that clear regulatory picture from that and you have regulatory bodies from around the globe talking about the benefits of it, I think the follower mindset it's very hard to overcome, right? And I also think, lastly, the world won't decentralize itself entirely overnight. It's going to be a process, and it'll take time, and not everything needs to be entirely decentralized. Some use cases make sense for things to be more decentralized than others. Everything's a spectrum, and I think the problem with crypto, Web3, and the world in general is we operate in absolutes all the time, and that may not necessarily be the smartest way to go about things.
I want to hear from Nathan because I know I can feel the energy going the opposite direction. And I think you have the best conversations when we're able to actually talk about differences of perspectives. I think that actually is what makes us great, and what's great about this ecosystem. Nathan, I know you have a different perspective. Let's hear it.
Thank you for noticing that because I do.
My job as a moderator.
I do have a bit of a different perspective on that. I'm the type that wouldn't want to give them an inch, or they might take a mile, so to speak, where regulation is something that we need to realize happens at the cryptographic level. It's baked into the things that we build, and if it's not baked into the things that we build, then maybe we haven't built the right systems. For example, when we look at FTX, when Sam was in Congress trying to get the DCCPA passed, this was dangerous in a way because it was trying to put regulations towards DeFi, and DeFi is a self-regulating system. And so if some regulatory body doesn't understand a system like that, they might come in for the wrong reasons, and they might try to be a power center, and they might try to do things that will prevent us from being self-regulatory. So I think that it's less about how do we rebuild trust, and it's more about how do we remove the need for trust. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to anybody on this panel about what to do or how to trust. Verify it for yourself, and I think that's probably how we rebuild.
So that's a great point. And is there some other point you want to get in there? If not, I'll jump in. Do you want to say? Oh, go ahead.
Just on the building the trust, I think the transparency, it's easy to say, hey, all the transactions are transparent, but to the average person, to get them to go to Etherscan, to verify the wallet, to go it is a lot of work. So to claim transparency, yes, it is there, but making it accessible, I guess you could say, hey, here it is in plain English. Don't send them the script, but also that comes with a little bit of there has to be a person behind there actually translating it, getting it out to the public. So it is a very tricky game,
which would require trust for that person too. So from a practical perspective, I think it's a great point too. I think the inch mile, I think the idea of trusting the regulators to do their job that also requires a huge amount of trust, which may not be practical. So I think from that perspective, it's an interesting.
Yeah, and in my former life, don't hold it against me. I was into policy. I ran for public office, so I definitely have a different perspective on this as well. I'm right in the middle because I just think while history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, it rhymes. Look, we've gone through different points like this before. There's no difference in the 1930s. Everybody bought a stock, everybody got in, and everybody could be their own boss and did things. And then there were some regulations that came in. I think what has to happen though is that it would be naive of us to say that they're not going to try to regulate this. They're going to regulate this stuff. And so what we have to do is we have to build a better future and be involved in the process, period, right? The people that care about this ecosystem need to be involved in talking to Congress on all sides because all of them have no idea of this space. Democrat, Republican, you call them whatever you want to, none of them have any. The 99% of them know, but most of the population knows, which is very, very little. And so it's up to us to make sure that they have an informed perspective and they don't have an ignorant perspective because they want to now regulate this. And unfortunately, because of the headlines and everything else that's happened, it's now giving them the incentive to do it with a lot of money being lost. And what we want to do is to make sure that they, A, don't overreach, and B, understand the potential of this technology to transform the economy and provide more opportunities. Because I do believe we should be as decentralized as possible. Like, the world is actually, we're the most decentralized we've ever been, right? Every stage of our growth has been better. Like, Web 1 is a better economy than pre-Web. Before Web 1, you couldn't connect the world at all, right? Everything had to be physical. Web 2, for all its flaws, definitely has a lot of benefits. So, like, media has been democratized. Access to voice has been democratized. Data hasn't been, but now that's what Web 3 is, and there's even more ownership opportunities. But I don't believe, this is also me, that it's possible. I don't think humans operate in complete decentralization. Humans need some type of ecosystem. So even if you're in these platforms where the wallets are decentralized, there are still platforms, right? So there has to be some places where people go and have some type of trust, because I think that's what humans have always required. Like, we're dependent upon one another. I think the challenge is, and I hear this part, is to trust the code. My challenge to that, and then I'm gonna get off my soapbox, is that code is written by people, period, right? So facial recognition technology, for example, can't actually identify black people very well, or anybody that's turns to not be a white male. Why is that? It's not that people were intentional about excluding people, it's that people that write code are people. So we have to then, and we have to have humans involved in some part of the process. I like to lean towards decentralization, but Nathan, as an engineer person, like, how do we do that balance? And I hear your point, and I want to lean towards that point too. But how do we recognize that we have to have humans involved in the process as well? Like, how do we balance that? What's your thought there?
I think Bitcoin also ran into this issue where, the developers are in a lot of control, and it's not easy to be an applied cryptographer, and some code is hard to read, and so just by that very nature, there is a bit of a centralization issue that's always been in the blockchain space. However, I will say that the code is verified. This stuff doesn't happen in a private back room. This stuff is always done in public. This stuff is always peer reviewed. Cryptography is notoriously reviewed. It's one of these things that trust is really important. And so we want to be sure that it's public and available for people to ensure that nothing fishy is happening behind the scenes. Code can go wrong. There can be bugs. Things like this are always.
There definitely will be, always.
So that is always a risk. But we spend a lot of time and care. We try very, very hard to make sure that all of these lines of code that we write that we know are going to have a lot of money flowing over them do not have flaws in them. And you're right that it is still, no matter what, at the end of the day, a human thing where humans will be interacting with each other, even if it looks a lot like mathematics and code. And that, I think, brings up the importance of things like DAOs, where we just use these things as simple tools. Hopefully, over time, we hammer them out to where they won't break, and then we can use them as coordination mechanisms to do the human things that we want in better ways.
All right, so I'm going to do a couple of a little really quick questions that I always do, kind of quick questions I always have at the end of my podcast. I have a podcast called Disrupting Web3 that's coming out next year, which I'll have all these gentlemen on for sure. Let's see. The future of Web3 is, finish the sentence.
The future of Web3 is a world where there isn't such a thing as you're a Web 2 person, a Web 3 person, Web etc. person. It's just going to be the internet. Like, that's the future. The Web 3 is a future where it's. How'd you begin your sentence?
That's good.
Yeah,
no, that's good. You got it. You finished it. The future of Web 3
is utility. Like every day, from starting your car to buying a football ticket, like whatever that is, your album. It's just baked in, if you will.
The future of Web3 is bottom up and not top down. It's for the people, and it's not for a select few.
I would say the future of Web3 is connecting cultures across the world and transforming ownership. That would be my answer. Okay, next one, just again, finish the sentence. What insiders of Web3 get wrong most often is?
Not understanding the idea of tribalism is sometimes more damaging than good.
Assuming everyone knows what you're talking about, or assuming what they know what the product is.
Or that they are in charge and that they should be listened to.
Yeah, and I would say what insiders get most wrong with Web3 is building for themselves and not for mass audience and accessibility. All right, the future of disruption in Web3 is...
These are hard sentences.
Yeah, I mean, hey.
The future of disruption. Shoot, I think the future of disruption in Web3 is... I think it's going to be when like the largest institutions of the world are building mainstream large consumer products using only those technologies.
Dang, that was my answer. I was gonna, yeah, like
Of course it was.
Yeah, like the disruption is gonna be kind of like what I said before, like the utility of it, like the decentralization and utility of owning your own data, owning your own assets, and having personal ownership.
Yeah, the future of disruption is going to be when things don't look like businesses as usual, whenever Iran is able to interact with us, whenever governments are more decentralized and democracy seems to actually be working.
Yeah, I would say the future disruption of Web3 is the ability to connect more people in an easier manner. Because at the end of the day, when you talk about the power of this technology, to me, it's really basic. It allows people to connect in a more efficient and a faster way without many people being in the middle. So I do agree with decentralization to a point. I just think there's going to always be some type of ecosystems or formats that people go to. All right, final call to action. What's the final call to action you all want to leave folks with here today? And we'll go from Nathan and work back down. What's your final call to action?
Yeah, come hang out with us. Help us curate culture. Come help us define what you want to see in the world. And don't let it just be me up here.
Yeah, and get curious. Like, do the research on stuff. Like, we research like the next sneakers coming out, or the next iPhone. Like, everyone knows the specs beforehand. Like, look into the specs for the next blockchain or the next product.
I think everyone here should challenge themselves to push their own limits, push their own curiosities, and really do your own research. I mean, everyone that's here is obviously deep into the space, but also try and encourage other people to do that own learning experience as well. Just because I feel like right now we live in a society where everyone's our attention spans are shrinking down drastically. People aren't really taking the time to learn how things work anymore. They just want to know what and why. I mean, what and how, but not necessarily why. And so I think moving forward, all of us in this room bear the power to help onboard the early and late majority audiences and groups of people. And so I think it's super important for us to get out of that tribalistic mindset, not be so jaded that people called us crazy for as long as they did, and really focus on trying to onboard the next 100 million, billion users into the space.
Yeah, I'll just close on that. I'll make a personal shout out to disrupt.art. Come on and join us too. Don't just go through. I think there will be multiple blockchains on this. At Disrupt.art, we would love to have more people onboarded too. And so even if it's not with us, if it's any other ecosystem, take today to talk to at least 3 to 5 people, because you are the most informed people in the space of almost 99% of your group. You know more about this ecosystem than almost anybody you know. So you have the power to help change. If you help onboard 5 new people, that's already 100 plus people that we've gotten. If they onboard, so on and so forth, we collectively can make sure this movement keeps going and not allow the media to drive the narrative, but instead we decide and we determine and we build the future together. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for your time. We appreciate you all.